So it can be really tempting to skip week one when it comes to revision. But for the reasons that hopefully I will explain pretty clearly in a minute, is that I think would be a mistake. We covered a couple of really important concepts in week one that are really important to make sure that you have at the tip of your fingers, number one, but secondly, that you have thought about in ways that you can bring into questions that will ask you to synthesize the information that you've received to demonstrate that you've thought about it and that you've had your own opinions. So in week one, we started firstly with looking at the different ethical lenses. You spent a lot of time in that in your first assignment task. I'm not going to mention that again, but in any detail. But what I do want you to think about is, well, actually, what kind of lawyer are you, and how are you approaching understanding the law and understanding what your ethical obligations are. Being able to draw on that will add flavor and uniqueness to answers that ask you to opine on what should a practitioner do in a particular situation, or how and why should a practitioner be sanctioned if they haven't actually followed the rules appropriately. In week one, we also spent quite a bit of time exploring what it means to be a lawyer. We were frustrated by the lack of definitions. In a nutshell, a lawyer is someone who does legal work, and legal work is the sort of work that is done by lawyers. Again, it's worth actually exploring that, particularly now that you've got a really good understanding of the hierarchy of duties, and think about what legal work is in the context, perhaps, of the lawyer's duty of competence. So we've explored competence in a couple of different ways. We've looked at it from the point of view of what work is being done now by technology that used to be done by human beings. And what does that mean for the nature of the work that we do as lawyers, and in particular, the work that you're likely to be doing in the future as lawyers? How will this inform the way that you prepare to be a lawyer and you think about the ways that you will advise your clients, that you will access legal research, that you will think about the evolution of the tools that you use and prepare yourself for that over time. We also spent a bit of time in our first week exploring the difference between a profession and a business. And clearly this is a question that came up a lot in weeks 2, 3, and 4 as we explored the ways in which the practice of law has been changing. We identified 3 common themes that all professions seem to have. That is, practitioners have a special skill or learning, they tend to be self-regulated or autonomous, and ultimately they provide an important public service. So thinking about those things one by one, over the following week as we explored special skills, we talked a lot about the way that those skills are changing, and how the nature of work and technology are changing what it means to be a legal practitioner and to do legal work. And I think that's a really important question, and one that in some ways you're really going to need to have a view on in order to succeed in this exam. Secondly, we introduced this idea of autonomy and self-regulation. So in week 1, 2, we introduced the sources of the ethical rules. Now, some of them are very historical. So we talked in week 1 and then subsequently, or the readings covered, the idea of the ancient inns of courts where all of the barristers lived together and they had to find a way to kind of get along, but also to ensure that they looked like to the world a reputable and useful profession. And also lawyers are in this particular circumstances where they in any other profession where it's self-regulated, where everything breaks down, ultimately things will end up in the courts. But where everything breaks down in the self-regulation of lawyers and you end up in the courts, it's still lawyers making judgments about other lawyers. Um, and one of the issues that happens with any kind of special skill and learning is we can have this information asymmetry, that the clients understand less and less about the way that the law applies to their particular dispute or the transaction that they want to give effect to. So we can end up in this very confusing potential moral hazard, to draw another economics term, where the person who is potentially going to suffer harm may not even recognize the harm that they suffer. And so where there is a potential for over-servicing or under-servicing, the client really has no way of knowing when their lawyer has done a good job unless another lawyer tells them. And that other lawyer who's likely regulating them may well have a conflict of interest in the colloquial sense of that language, and may not be overly motivated to tell the victim in a moral hazard situation that maybe there was a better outcome for them. So this is a theme that we explored over and over again, and I think the readings in module one, will really go and remind yourself of them to go back to that initial position. The last of the three duties or three elements that we see common across the professions is this idea that a profession offers a public service. Now, this might not have really meant very much to you went back in week one, but I hope now, particularly as we've looked at the hierarchy of duties and in particular the layers of duties that lawyers owe to the courts, and the importance you will have seen as we've unpicked the disciplinary proceedings and the disciplinary process, the importance of the administration of justice and access to justice across a range of different ethical contexts should be much, much clearer. I'd be really interested in where you land. Do you think, with all of the changes that are happening, with what you see in the profession, that it is true to say that we, and I'm talking about lawyers because I am one, are we a profession or are we a business? Is there room for both? And what happens when there is a conflict between what it is that one might want to achieve as a good business person with what it is that one might want to achieve as a good lawyer? Clearly, not all lawyers are commercial lawyers. And so the motivations that they have might be very different, bringing us back to the Parker and Evans concept of the ethical lenses that we look at the world through. So hopefully that's a little bit of a heads up of the kind of things you might want to think about in the most detail as you explore your revision of the first week. And in the next video, I will move on to some of the hierarchy duties. Cheers.